Hi, how's it going? It's Michael Redmond here. Now, you may well know me as a stand-up comedian, which I actually was for over 30 years. Or you might know me better as Father Stone from the Channel 4 sitcom Father Ted. And if that happens to be the case and you're still wondering how I am after all these years, well, I'm still fine. So what am I doing here? Well, I've kind of retired from stand-up, but I keep coming up with, the odd idea for a joke or a comedy monologue or a comedy routine and that kind of thing because, to be honest with you, I quickly realised that taking up gardening in retirement wasn't going to satisfy me enough. It wasn't going to do it for me. Jesus, gardening, And anyway, I don't have a garden, which is probably why I was often found standing in other people's gardens over the years. So what's this all about? Well, this is my comedy podcast, which I've called "What Are You Doing in My Garden?" I suppose the best way to describe it is it's a short weekly podcast in which I'll be, throwing in a joke or two or talking about a range of things from, say, drink driving in Ireland in the 1970s, my chance encounter with Joanna Lumley, pole vaulting geriatrics, and lots of other things. But no poetry. Absolutely no bloody poetry. So if you've anything to say or add to what I've been musing on the podcast, it'd be great to hear from you. Or in fact, also if you've any questions about Father Ted, I'd be happy to answer them as well. The email address for the podcast is whatdoyoudoinmygarden@gmail.com. Okay, it's Michael Redmond here again with episode 7 of the podcast, which is called Trains, No Planes, Ferries and Shuttle Buses. It's about a little story from when I was younger in my youth in Dublin, about a journey I made from Torremolinos to Dublin overland. It was all down to my phobia of flying at the time anyway. You'll hear all about it in the next section. Anyway, so welcome to the episode, and it's looking outside my window. As you know, I live in Glasgow and it's a pretty dreich day outside, and dreich actually, I think it's probably one of my favourite words in the English language because it's so descriptive. I mean, if somebody asks you, what's the weather like where you are, and you say it's a bit dreich, there's no two ways about it. It's obviously, a blanket of grey clouds and drizzly rain, so it's pretty shitty looking outside. Actually, dreich is a great word, and if anybody, and particularly Scots, if you've got any other words like that are so descriptive, that are only particularly used in Scotland, I'd love to hear from you. But I'm not going to let the dreich weather get me down. I'm in a good mood, and I also have a nice venison steak ready for my dinner. That might sound a bit poncy, but I'm getting on a bit, and I'm entitled to my little pleasures, I think. I actually got my vegan steak from my local supermarket, the butcher in my local supermarket, a guy called Eamon. Now, you may have heard me talking about him before. Eamon is he's around my age, but he's maybe even a little younger, but he's insanely anti-vegetarianism, insanely anti-vegan. And he always seems to latch on to me for his rants about vegans, and maybe it's because I'm Irish, I don't know. He's actually, put it another way of that, Eamon, he's one of those Irish people that, I don't think he's racist, I've never heard him being racist, but he's one of those Irish people who I think he'd actually be more comfortable if everybody in the world was Irish. But anytime I buy meat from me, he always goes into an anti-vegan rant. And I don't encourage him, I can assure you. I just sort of stand there. I don't argue against him because I can't be bothered. I just want to get my meat and leave. But he always seems to latch on to me for some reason. And it's so bad sometimes, if I want some meat, I just take a 20-minute bus ride to another butcher's to avoid having to listen to Eamon ranting about vegans. But anyway, I didn't have time yesterday, so I had to get my venison steak from Eamon. When I walked in, I could see he was already in a foul mood, and I can only describe his face as not like, he looked like a bulldog that had been stung by nettles. And I walked up to him, and my first mistake was I said, "Hi Eamon, how's it going?" Instead of just saying, "Eamon, can I have a venison steak, please?" But when I said, "How's it going?" I could see he took that as a cue to go into one of his rants. He says, "I'll tell you how it's going. It's going bloody awful. Feckin' brutal. It's the wife." And I said, I'm really sorry, Eamon. Is she ill? You could put it that way, I suppose. Mentally ill is the way I would put it. She's gone off her bloody head as far as I can see. I'll tell you what, you know what it is? I'll tell you what it is, vegan. My own wife, married for 30 years. She tells me the other day, drops this into me, "I'll become a vegan," she says to me. I couldn't feckin' believe it. I'll tell you how I found out. It was about 2 or 3 days ago. I brought home these 2 lovely, juicy sirloin steaks for our dinner, right? 2 hours later, I'm sitting down. She serves me up my sirloin steak and chips. Feckin' lovely. So I looks over the whore, and what has she got on her plate? I tell you, it wasn't even a plate. It was a bowl of pulses and rice. And she tells me she's become a vegan. I couldn't believe it. After 30 years of marriage, my own wife married her in good faith, and now she's become a vegan. And to make matters even feckin' worse, I'll tell you what, she's having a vegan evening in her house next week. It's going to be vegans invading my house. As far as I'm concerned, I can tell you, it's grounds for divorce. Grounds for divorce. And I said, Eamon, I don't think, a change of diet is really grounds for divorce. He said, oh, we'd see about that. We'd see about that, I can tell you. We'd see about that. Watch this space. So I think anytime I need meat in the next few weeks, I'm not going to go to the other boards. I'm going to go to Eamon and get an update on his divorce proceedings. I'll keep you posted. Okay, so on with this week's episode, which is mainly concerned with fears and phobias. As I mentioned, the overland journey I had from Dublin to Torremolinos in my youth was due to my phobia of flying, and I'll also be telling you about how I managed to conquer my phobia of flying. I'll also be talking about other sort of not so common phobias. Like we all know about fears of flying and heights and spiders and claustrophobia, but I've come across some interesting little phobias, which I'm sure many of you never heard about before. Really unusual, freaky little phobias that some people obviously have, because I've checked it out, and they do actually exist. And we'll be talking about that later on. Right, so this week I'm going to tell you that story I mentioned about my 4-day overland journey from Dublin to Torremolinos. I'll explain. It was back in 1980, the summer of 1980, and myself, my brother, and a mate decided to go on a sort of a lad's holiday to Torremolinos in Spain. Now, I'd never actually been abroad before. I was that stage I was 30 years old. I'd never been abroad before, and the reason I'd never been abroad before was because I had this severe phobia of flying. I knew that if I flew to Torremolinos on holidays, there'd be no point, because I wouldn't be able to enjoy the holiday because I'd be just fretting about coming back. But my brother and my mate, they flew. But I decided, to go overland from Dublin to Torremolinos. Now, I told the story to a friend of mine recently. He couldn't believe it because he's no fear of flying, but he couldn't actually believe that somebody would go on holidays and spend 4 days on trains, boats, ferries, and shuttle buses to go to a holiday in Spain. Now, it wasn't just the 4-day journey there. I also had to do 4 days on the way back. So I'll give you a little bit of an idea of the itinerary I took. I think it was a night ferry, I think, from Dublin to Holyhead in Wales. That takes about 4 hours, I think. And I don't really know what I did, during those 4 hours, because I said there was no mobile phones or iPads. Maybe I had a book. I can't even remember. It was a 4-hour journey from Dublin to Holyhead, and then you got a train. I think you had to wait for about 2 hours actually to get the train from Holyhead to London, because it was the ferry over was called the mail boat. They carried the mail over from Dublin to Britain, and then it had to be transferred to the train in Holyhead. So it was about a 2-hour wait in Holyhead, then all the way down to London. Then I can't remember what there was the delay in London, but there was a connecting train anyway from London to Dover, and then a ferry from Dover to Calais, a train from Calais to Paris, then another train from Paris to sort of the southeast of the French border near Spain, and a shuttle bus from there to San Sebastian, the train station in San Sebastian in Spain, another train from San Sebastian to Madrid, and finally a shuttle bus to Torremolinos. And I got there after 4 long days travelling. And people can't believe I actually did that. But it wasn't in a way, it was kind of an adventure, I suppose, because I said I'd never been abroad before, but I didn't do it because I thought this would be a good adventure. I did it because I was just terrified of flying. I had this phobia of flying, and I just couldn't fly. Now, there was no big incidents on the way that I can recall, but until we got to Paris. And I remember there was a big delay in Paris because my connecting train from Paris to the Spanish border was about 6 hour waiting time. But I thought I'd just, hang around the station and it'd be nice, pretty cool. I haven't been abroad before, and I might even wander outside for a bit and see what's going on in Paris. But the problem was that I thought I could, just hang around in the train station and maybe even sleep if I wanted to, but they closed the train station at midnight, and my train wasn't until 6 o'clock in the morning, which means I had to spend 6 hours standing outside the train station in Paris. I think it was the Gare de Lyon, but I can't be sure about that. But I also remember it was pissing rain. I had this idea of going from Dublin to France. It would be immediately sort of tropical weather, but it was pissing rain, pissing down the heavens. But there was this young guy. I think he was either pissed or on some kind of drugs, but he kept going up to this lamppost and repeatedly banging his forehead against the lamppost. That went on for about a half an hour, and I thought he's going to kill himself or maybe just suddenly turn around, take out a gun and shoot us. It was a bit scary. But I don't know, maybe after about an hour or so, the police came along and took him away, and it was quite relaxed after that, but still not very pleasant. I still had to wait 5 hours outside the Gare de Lyon before my connecting train to the Spanish border. Most people said, probably would have gone for a walk, but I had a big, heavy backpack, and I was a bit tired. I've been traveling, at this stage for about a day and a half with hardly any sleep either, because I'm not very good at sleeping on trains or boats. It doesn't really suit me. I can't really sleep, so I wasn't really in the mood for wandering around Paris and, taking in the Champs-Élysées or the Eiffel Tower, or, wandering around the South Bank or whatever you do when you get to Paris. So I just stood outside for 5 hours, probably having more cigarettes than I would normally have, and eventually got my train at 6 o'clock from Paris to somewhere on the Spanish border. I can't remember, the French border, which is near the Spanish border. I can't remember what the place was. But the first thing I remember is on the train, I managed to sit beside this very attractive woman. I didn't do it purposely. I wasn't praying. I wasn't sort of praying for some attractive woman and I'm going to sit beside her and chat her up. I just happened to sit on a seat beside this attractive woman, which was vacant. And I kind of thought I'd like to, talk to her. I don't mean chat her up, but just, talk to somebody who's French. I'd never met any French people before. I thought it'd be nice to have a chat with her. But then I realised that, I couldn't really speak any French. I mean, I had a smattering of French from school, I think. I could probably get a sentence or two out, but I knew if I said something to her in my sort of pidgin French, I wouldn't understand what she came back with, so I would look pretty stupid. And I also didn't want to say, do you speak English? Because that sounds really fucking naff. So I sat there for, I think it was about an hour on this train from Paris, trying to think up something to say to this woman, but I couldn't. Anyway, after about an hour, she came to her station and she got off. And as I got up to let her off, I said to her, enchanté, just sort of blurted it out. And what an idiotic thing to say, because enchanté in France, it means you say enchanté when you're greeting somebody in France. You don't say it when they're leaving. And it just sounded like so forced and pathetic. And she just sort of, as I let her by me, she had this sort of pitiful smile on her face, and she obviously knew this guy's an utter gobshite, and probably delighted that I didn't try to talk to her. But it was one of those things that, when you make an idiot of yourself at some point in your life, and it comes back to haunt you at unexpected moments. I mean, this was 44 years ago, but still, occasionally, if I'm maybe walking down the street on a nice sunny day in a cheery mood, suddenly enchanté comes down and dawns on me, and I think, oh, fuck no. Or maybe if I'm just about to drift into sleep and then think, enchanté, what a fucking idiot. You're never going to escape from it. It's going to be there for your entire life. Now, I don't recall much else happening on the rest of the train journey from France. I was probably just looking at the landscape and enjoying it, because it was during the day, so I could see some of the countryside. And we arrived at this sort of stop-off place between the Spanish-French border, and we got a shuttle bus from there to San Sebastian, which the train from San Sebastian went to Madrid. Now, before I got on the train in San Sebastian, I sort of determined to myself, if I come across an attractive woman this time and sit beside her, I'm going to say something, whether she's Spanish or French. I don't care. Even if I make an idiot of myself, it'd be better than just saying enchanté at the end and looking really, really stupid. So I got on the train. There was these three Spanish nuns. I think they're all sort of in their 60s, sitting at this table. And I sat across from them. There wasn't any attractive woman to sit beside, but I just happened to sit across from them. I didn't decide to sit. There was an empty seat there, so I just sat across from these three Spanish nuns. And the others, I think they must have taken pity on me, because I can have a sort of a little boy lost look at times, and I was travelling on my own. I was also quite tired, so I probably looked a bit lonely and lost. So they started talking to me, and when they realised I was Irish, they insisted. They didn't just invite me over to the table. They insisted. I didn't particularly want to go, to be honest with you, because the smell of cheese was pretty fucking horrendous. But it's not a reflection on their personal hygiene. They'd apparently been visiting one of the nuns' brother and his wife in San Sebastian. They were cheesemakers, so they had all these loads of sort of horrible, smelly cheeses. So they insisted I sat beside them. I think it was because they learnt I was Irish, and they assumed probably I was a Catholic as well. maybe if I was a Protestant, I wouldn't have got a look in. So I spent the entire journey from San Sebastian to Madrid with 3 60-year-old Spanish nuns smelling of cheese. And it was, apart from the smell of cheese, it wasn't unpleasant because some of them had a little bit of English, so at least I had a little bit of company. So I got to Madrid and I had a 2-hour stopover in Madrid, I think it was. And I went for a little walk around Madrid. Well, not around Madrid, I was sort of in the environs of the train station. And the only thing I remember is drinking water from a fountain because there was no bottled water then that I can recall. And I was quite parched, so I had this big gulp of water from a fountain. And then went back to the station. When I got back to the station, after about an hour, I think it was, I was bursting for a piss, so I went into the toilet, as you would. And I say toilet, it wasn't kind of like a toilet you would expect nowadays, no sort of, like a modern toilet. It was just basically a trough. So I entered the trough and started having a pee. Now there was a space beside me, and after a few seconds, this guy, probably about 60 or 70, I vividly remember he was wearing this light blue uniform, which was the sort of uniform of the service personnel in Madrid station. So he started peeing, but I noticed after a few seconds he started looking down at my willy. I thought, oh fuck no, this guy's a creep. He's going to do something unpleasant. Well, in the end, he did do something unpleasant, but it wasn't a sexual thing. He started screaming and shouting at me, and it freaked me out. I thought, what's wrong with this guy? And I realized after a while it wasn't just some guy going off on a rant on his own. He wasn't a nutter, because he was staring at me, very deliberately staring at me, and shouting at these, what I assume were expletives, shouting at me. He was definitely trying to insult me. So I stopped peeing. I got such a fright. But then he did his pee and he just left. But then after a few seconds, another guy of a similar age, wearing the exact same light blue uniform, stood beside me to have a pee. He again looked down at my willy. I thought, for fuck's sake, what's going on here? But then he started shouting at me again, like the other guy had. He was even louder, I think, than the first guy. And I realized at this stage, this is not a coincidence. These aren't just 2 nutters who just happened to stand beside me at a urinal. They're definitely making a serious attempt to fucking insult me. Now, I've been traveling for, let's say, about 3.5 days at this stage. And I'm normally a quite mild-mannered person, but I realized the 2 of them were definitely trying to insult me. It was a concerted effort. So I started screaming back at him in my strong Irish accent. I even made the accent a bit stronger to sound more intimidating. I was probably about 3 or 4 decibels higher than his fucking rant. And he realized people in the station, in the toilet, were starting to look at us, so he shut up and left. Now, it was only, I think maybe it's about 2 or 3 years later, I discovered that Madrid, during the Second World War, was the center of Franco's headquarters. Franco, as you may know, sided with Hitler during the war. And a lot of the residents of Madrid were anti-Semitic. Now, these 2 guys, I say, they were in their 60s and 70s. Now, this is 1980, so it was only, 35 years after the war. So they could have served with Franco in the war. And it was obviously an anti-Semitic rant. And I'll tell you why I was anti-Semitic, because I happen to be circumcised. I'm not Jewish, but I am circumcised. I don't know. I think my parents told me it was cleaner to be circumcised or something. I don't really know why, to be honest. I never got a sort of direct answer why we were all circumcised. But it was obviously an anti-Semitic rant, and that was the only really unpleasant sort of incident that happened on my 4-day journey from Dublin to Torremolinos. Anyway, I got the connecting train. It might have been a shuttle bus, I can't remember, and arrived in Torremolinos for my holiday after 4 days travelling. I think I had to spend 1 day sleeping because I was just totally knackered after 4 days overland travelling. And I don't recall any major incident or interesting incident while we were in Torremolinos. It was just I say it was a lads' holiday, and we just got pissed every night and maybe lay on the beach looking at some Swedish women, I think, and getting sunburnt, that kind of thing. But I did have a little holiday romance with a Finnish woman named Sirpa. I think it was partly because her exotic name sort of attracted me to her, Sirpa. And I had a little holiday romance with Sirpa. But you may have noticed that in previous episodes of the podcast, I've mentioned that we've had downloads from all over Europe and Asia and America and Canada and Scandinavia, but no downloads from Finland. But I noticed this week there are actually 2 downloads from Finland. So maybe it's Serpa coming back after all these years. After 44 years, maybe Serpa wants to connect with me again. And if it is you, Serpa, please do get in touch. It'd be brilliant to have a chat with her. Now, that was about it. I don't think, I was obviously dreading the journey back, because when the 4-day journey there is kind of excitement because you're going on holidays, but the 4-day journey back after the holiday finished wasn't really very exciting. I don't remember any particular incident apart from it was on the train back from Dover to London, and there was an old English couple sitting across from me. Now, I want to emphasize I'm not in the least bit anti-English, because I owe my career to England, and I've lived in England for many years, and I've still many friends in London. So this is not, it's just that some people in England, sort of middle England, still have this sort of, particularly if they're older, have this sort of colonial attitude. But I remember at one point the train stopped, and then it started rolling backwards very, very, very gently. And the woman turned to her husband and said, "Oh, I'm glad we're back home, George. If that was abroad, I'd be a bit worried now." So she obviously wasn't concerned about, the train backing over a cliff in England. That'd be fine as long as it wasn't abroad. Anyway, that was it. Nothing else happened. I got back to Dublin again after 4 days. And I think it was probably after that I really decided, this next time I go on holidays, I'm not bloody doing that. It's just ridiculous. So I did manage to get over my phobia of flying eventually. And I'll tell you how I did it. I was recommended this book. It was written by a former pilot. I don't know what his name is, but he also did some study of psychology. And he told us that the reason he wrote the book was because he had many friends and some of his family who were afraid of flying, and he wanted to help them get over the fear of flying, because he knew how sort of limiting it is. If you can't fly anywhere, it's it really does limit your life. So the book was called SOAR, S-O-A-R. And there were two things in the book that really struck me and sort of won me over and helped me conquer my really severe phobia of flying. Now, the first thing he said was, there's no point in me telling you that if you have a much better chance of dying in a car crash than you have in an airplane. Because if you have a phobia of flying, that means fuck all to you, because phobias are not rational, and people saying that to you, it just annoys you, actually. It doesn't help your phobia at all. You just find it irritating, because you have a better chance of dying in a car crash. But it's not that. It's a phobia. There's no logic to it. And the second thing he said, which won me over and helped me conquer my fear, was he explained how planes manage to stay up in the air, the aerodynamics of the whole thing, which I didn't really know, but I assumed, I didn't assume, but because of my phobia, I thought the minute I step in a plane, it's going to plummet to the ground once it takes off. And I just didn't believe it could stay up there. But he explained the aerodynamics of it, why a plane manages to stay up in the air. Even if its engines go off, even if its engines fail, it can still glide for I think it's about half an hour in the air. And it's to do with the fact that, do you remember when you're a kid and you're traveling, you're sitting in the back of your parents' car and you open the window and put your arm outside? Now, you don't have to hold your arm up, because the car is traveling at, say, 40 miles an hour, and the wind outside underneath your arm holds your arm up. And it's the same with an airplane. It's kind of like a gel, really. And that is how I managed to get over my phobia of flying. So if any of you still have a phobia of flying, I really do recommend this book. It's called SOAR, S-O-A-R. So do get it, and it'll probably help, at least I hope it will, help you get over your fear of flying. Now, I've told you already how I managed to conquer my phobia of flying, and I put out a little post on social media asking any of you if any sort of similar stories, how phobias have managed to screw up your life. And I had an interesting reply from a woman named Julie Ballou. She's a comedian who used to work on the comedy circuit in London when I was there. Maybe she still does. But she told me that the reason she emigrated from Australia was because of her fear of huge spiders. She just couldn't handle it. I can kind of understand it, because although I don't have a phobia of spiders, I have a slight aversion to them. But I managed to get over that aversion as well. I didn't deliberately do it like I did with the flying, because I was determined to conquer my phobia of flying because it was messing up with my life. But spiders weren't really invading my life that much. I just didn't particularly like them. But the reason I got over my aversion to them was it was when my kids were quite younger. We went to this place called Butterfly Farm. I think it was somewhere between Edinburgh and Glasgow. Sort of an indoor place, obviously, which had a place for butterflies. There was also an ant house. But there was also this section where this guy had these snakes and spiders, and not your normal house spiders, big furry tarantulas. And he brought out a snake first and asked us all to sort of touch the snake's skin. And I was a little bit freaked because I was expecting it to be really scaly and horrible, but it was actually quite soft. It was actually like a baby skin. But then he brought out this big furry tarantula. Now, I did freak a bit when he brought it out because, I say I'm not phobic, but I do have a bit of an aversion. I had a bit of an aversion to spiders at the time. But he put this tarantula on the back of one of my son's hand. And I was expecting it to be, to scutter about like you see in films. You see sort of these big tarantulas scuttering about like crabs running about the place. But they don't actually move like that. They move actually quite slowly. And it wasn't scary at all. So I decided to give it a go myself. And he put the tarantula on the back of my hand as well. And I didn't freak out at all. It just moved really, really slowly. And I thought its legs would be really sharp and clawy, but they were actually quite soft. It was like being sort of brushed by a feather. So Julie Ballou, if you are listening and you want to get over your phobia of spiders, do go to the butterfly farm between Edinburgh and Glasgow, and you might get over your fear of spiders. Mind you, it's probably a bit late to go back to Australia at this stage. Now, I've talked about, common phobias like flying and spiders and heights, all that kind of thing, agoraphobia. But there are some very obscure phobias out there. I sort of investigated because I'm doing this episode on phobias. So I thought I'd have a look and see what sort of other little phobias are out there. And there are some really, really obscure ones. And the first one I noticed was one called pogonophobia. And that's actually a fear of beards and moustaches. I'd never heard of this before. People actually have a fear of moustaches and beards. And I think maybe that explains why over the years, occasionally, if I approached a woman, she ran away. I assumed at the time maybe it was the wrong deodorant or something, but it could have been my big bushy moustache that she had a phobia of. And the other one that really sort of hit me between the eyeballs was sent in by a guy called Brendan Cruz, I think his name is, on Twitter. And it's called, forgive me if I don't get the pronunciation correct the first time, called anatidaephobia. Anatidaephobia. And it's actually a fear of being watched by ducks. I thought it was a joke. I thought something out of Monty Python. Somebody actually going around terrified that they're being watched by a duck. Now, it's more of a paranoid thing. It's not a fear that the duck is actually sitting on your windowsill staring at you. It's just a fear that there is a duck out there somewhere staring at you. And it does actually exist. Anatidaephobia. So look it up. Now, if there are any of you out there who do suffer from this phobia, please get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. Or indeed, if you know anybody else who suffers from that phobia, it'd be great to hear from you. Now, obviously, as I say, I managed to conquer my fear of flying and spiders and sort of becoming an agony aunt for phobias. But I think, to be honest with you, I don't think I can come up with a cure for a fear of being watched by ducks. Right, so that's about it for this week. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. And as usual, we're going to finish with my Cointreau cocktail of the week, which I also hope you will enjoy. So see you next week. Till then, bye-bye. Okay, welcome back. It is now time for our Cointreau cocktail of the week, which this week is called a Corpse Reviver. It's one of my favourites, but it's also an incredibly strong drink, so I advise you to be careful. Just have the one unless you want to get really, really pissed. But a Corpse Reviver, I suppose, suitable for somebody like me in my advancing years, or maybe even if you're just a recent corpse. Anyway, sit back and pour yourself one. For this cocktail, you will need all the ingredients. By the way, have the same measurements. You need 20 milliliters of Cointreau, obviously. 20 milliliters of Lillet Blanc. Now, if you don't have Lillet Blanc, that's fine. I didn't have any Lillet Blanc. I don't even know what it is to be precise. But instead of Lillet Blanc, you could have a vermouth or a Pinot Grigio, the famous Irish wine. Same measurements again for some dry gin, and then same measurements again for some lemon juice. So sit back and pour yourself one, and as I say, be very careful. I did have two once, and I got a little bit too pissed. So enjoy.